We are on Daf Mem Ches Amud Aleph, page 48a, and we've been learning about the laws of joining the Zimun, even if a person did not eat bread. And how many people can join the Zimun if they don't eat bread?
We can't hear you. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, so the Gemara that we learned, well, we discussed the story, of course, Abaye and Rava. We discussed the two ways of learning it, that you either learn that Abaye and Rava's story is proving the point that you could have someone even young do a zimun, join a zimun, and that would really follow the Sephardic way of doing things, meaning that they're learning the story, that it's a story where they're going to be joining the zimun. Abaye and Rava were going to join the zimun, and Rava was deciding if they can join, and they were very young at the time. So he asked them if they knew Lamim Avarchen, to who you say a bracha to, and if they knew, then they could actually join the zimun. And so he was very impressed that they actually knew at their age, Lamim Avarchen, who you say a bracha to, and he said, "Oh, I see you're going to both become great scholars." And so that would be a source that you could do a zimun with any young child that knows who you say a bracha to. On the other hand, the other way of learning the Gemara is that Rabba was not dealing with the zimun at that point. It was really just an issue of asking the question, do you know who you say brachas to? And he was just testing them. And it didn't have to do with the zimun, because actually for a zimun, you really have to follow the other rules that you need to have either the shtei sairos, you need to have the 2 pubic hairs, and so on. And this rule goes hand in hand with those rules, meaning that the katan knows who you make a bracha to, and he also has 2 sairos. And if that's the case, then the story afterwards must be that it didn't have to do with a zimun, because these kids are too young to do a zimun. You need to have 2 pubic hairs. And we're talking about someone who's maybe 12 and a half. We're dealing with someone who's older, the kids that are older, and they need to have, in other words, it's a qualification. We're qualifying that statement that says you need to have the 2 pubic hairs to do a zimun, katan hapireach, to do a zimun. We're qualifying it and saying you also need to know lamim avarchin, which would basically mean he's almost 13 and he knows lamim avarchin. Maybe you could be lenient. There would be such a room for leniency, and based on that, this story must be talking about that they weren't really doing a zimun. Rabba was just asking these young students, if they knew, what they knew. He's giving them a little test. And according to that, the story doesn't really prove a halacha about zimun. It's just an example of asking children lamim avarchin to see, if people. That's the question that you would ask. And there is one other way of learning our Gemara that ends up being that the Yushalmi argues on our Gemara and says you really need to be an adult in order to do a zimun, and there's no leniencies at all. And the question is, there is a rabbi that seems in the halachic rulings, he seems to follow that Jerusalem Talmud. The question is, how do you follow a Jerusalem Talmud when you have the Babylonian Talmud seemingly saying that you're supposed to allow a child who knows lamim avarchin to bench? So it does seem a little complicated. This whole there's a lot of ink has been spilled on this discussion of how, what is the Ashkenazic, to explain the Ashkenazic ruling. In other words, our Gemara seems to follow the Sephardic. It does seem to imply that the Sephardic way, it does flow a little smoother with our Gemara. But anyway, we're going to continue. And yesterday we learned a little further. We mentioned that Rabbi Yehuda Rav, Rabbi Yehuda Berei Rav Shmuel Bar Shelas, it said in the name of Rav, he said 9 people that ate dagon, they ate grain, meaning they ate bread, and it was bread made from grain. They can join a 10th person, or the 10th person can join them with even though he just ate vegetables, and he can join together. Now, Reb Zera says, what about, Reb Zera had asked him a question, what about 9, and what about 8 and 2? What about 7 and 3? In other words, how many people can eat bread? What's the minimum amount of people that could eat bread and the others will just eat this yerek vegetable, and that would be good enough to join the zimun. And this is a very practical question because it happens all the time in scenarios where you have a minion of people benching him, and so it does happen often. And here the Gemara says clearly that the answer Rav Yehuda gave him was that it's no problem, 7 and 3, 8 and 2, no problem. Now the problem the problem is where he forgot to ask, or he didn't ask, or he thought it was obvious that what about 6 and 4? Now Reb Yirmiyah is the opposite. Reb Yirmiyah is 6 and 4 is definitely good. It all boils down to majority. It's all boils. That's what it is. It's either majority or not majority. If you have majority bread, majority people ate bread, and the other 4 people ate vegetables. No problem. You join the zima. That's the way Reb Yirmiyah sees it. Reb Zera sees it not that way. He sees it either he's not sure if it goes by majority. It might be majority that is recognizable, which would mean 2/3. Or another way of understanding Reb Zera is he's definite that you need to have ruba de minkara. He definitely believes that 6 and 4 does not work. So Reb Yirmiyah is definite that 6 and 4 works, and Reb Zera, we're not sure how to understand him. There's 2 versions of the Gemara. In other words, it's a difference of a letter in the Gemara. A difference of a letter of it's either vadai or vaida. It's really like a different version, but it actually changes the understanding of Reb Zera. He either holds that it's a question of 6 and 4, he's not sure, or he's definite that 6 and 4 does not work. You cannot do a zimun of 10. Now, can you do a zimun of 3? Of course you can do a zimun of 3, but you might not be able to do a zimun of 10, or you definitely can't do a zimun of 10 according to Reb Zera. Yes, David.
Yeah, the smaller group of 3, the 3 that don't wash, they have to have a vegetable, or could they have a glass of water, or could they have a piece of fruit?
In Shulchan Aruch, it deals with it. Now, we saw the story of Yanai, where he drank wine, right? So we see drinking is also good. Now, does that apply to water? And that's a big question. It's brought in the Shulchan Aruch here on chapter 197. And the Shulchan Aruch itself says that water doesn't, anything besides water. If he drinks a revius of any liquid, which would mean like either 2.9 ounces or different opinions of how big a revius is, a quarter of a lug. It either is 2.9 ounces or maybe in the 3 ounces, 4 ounces, according to 5 ounces. But anyway, if you drink a cup of water or a cup of another drink, then it's fine, except chutz min hamayim, except water. And because water doesn't sustain a person, not good enough to join. Now, in the Mishnah Berurah, he brings the Magen Avram that argues, and he says that water is also included. Because drinking is just like eating. Now, so it does seem to be a machlokes about water, but anything besides water seems to be no question. So anyway, back to the Gemara. So we're going over the Gemara that we learned. So so you have this argument between Reb Zera and Reb Yirmiyah. And it basically boils down to, do you need majority, or do you need majority de minkara, a recognizable majority? And the final conclusion seems to be that ruba de minkara is what we follow. And that applies in, that's a very practical halacha, that you need to have 7 people that made hamaitzi, that recited the bracha, that ate bread, and they can join together for the zimun to make it a 10 people zimun and say Elokeinu in the zimun. So that's the final conclusion. It's brought in Shulchan Aruch that way as well, that Va'afilu shiva, even if 7 achlu dagan, even if 7, this is in the code of law, in the Machaber, Rabbi Yosef Kairo's code of law. in chapter 197, he says, even if 7 ate dagon, ate grain, and 3 ate yerek, and 3 of them ate vegetables, mitzdarfen, they can join together, but 6 can't. Deruba deminkara beinan, because you need a majority that's recognizable. And if we look in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, he says even 3 ate yerek or drank, mitzdarfen l'shiva, they can join the 7. This is in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch in chapter 197, the second paragraph 2, that 3 ate vegetables, 2 drank. 3 ate vegetables or drank. They can join together to be for this with the other 7 that ate bread to make a zimun with Hashem's name. Why? Since Roiv Hanikar who me'ochle pas, the recognizable majority ate bread, but 6 that ate bread can't do a zimun with Hashem's name and join 4 that didn't eat bread, because 6 is not a Roiv Hanikar. 6 is not a recognizable majority. And so this is the simple understanding of our Gemara, that you have this machlekes Reb Zera Reb Yirmiyah, and according to this, comes out that we paskin like Reb Zera, and you need the Roiv Hanikar, right? Ruba Deminkara. Yes, Ben.
I wonder what's the reason that one person cannot do a birchat mazon by himself?
He can do birchat mazon. We're talking about a zimun, to say Rabotai Nevarech, the extra bracha of zimun. Okay, so
the zimun is calling in other people to join.
To join together and bench together.
Okay, that's the reason.
You even say Hashem's name. Zimun, you're saying Hashem's name as well. If you have 10, you can do Hashem's name. Now, I should mention.
Well, we say Hashem's name when we do other blessings by ourselves.
Yeah, but the zimun itself doesn't have Hashem's name unless you have 10 people.
Okay.
Baruch she'achalnu mishaloi, doesn't have Hashem's.
Yeah. I'm saying I don't know why. Because if you drink a glass of water, you say Hashem Hashem.
Right. Why didn't they include Hashem's name in the zimun?
In both.
It's an interesting question. Why? I think we might have touched on it when we started the chapter. We might have touched on a little about this the zimun that it's called a bracha, but it doesn't have Hashem's name. It might have been like a little discussion about it in the beginning. Why?
I'll go back and read it.
Yeah, we'll have to. I don't remember if we actually explained it, but I remember thinking about it. It is interesting that it's a bracha, but it doesn't have Hashem's name. Like what? Here, we said a Ravid here. There was a Ravid that said Berchas Hazimun, even though it's been a Torah, it doesn't have Hashem's name because it's not kavua. Because they could eat alone and not be chayiv in the zimun, so therefore they didn't make Hashem's name. So that was one of the explanations. It's not like.
But when you eat by yourself, you can't say Hashem Hashem.
No, you can't do a zimun. The zimun bracha is not kavua. The other brachas have Hashem's name. The zimun bracha is not a kavua. Therefore, they didn't. Another reason is given. Meiri has another reason that since you didn't, they didn't do a zimun only to awaken and encourage the people to bench with concentration. Therefore, that was the reason for the zimun. Therefore, they didn't establish a bracha with Hashem's name. Because it's only about getting people to have in mind to concentrate for the other. But anyway, when you have 10, you do Hashem. You do say Hashem's name.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So the Gemara continues with this story of Yanai Hamelach, and the Gemara says that Yanai was with his wife, and they had bread, and he killed the rabbis, and he didn't have anyone to do the bracha to do the bracha. Now, the simple understanding would be he didn't have anyone who knew the benching. So we needed someone to join them to do the Zimun. If you do a Zimun, you could bench, you could say the blessing and have them in mind. Now, I mentioned yesterday that does sound a little surprising. I mean, the whole thing sounds surprising. Robert said it's a little funny. The guy goes and murders rabbis, and then he wants to do a Zimun. He's like, all of a sudden, he's a big religious guy. He's doing the Zimun, and it's not enough to just, he wants to do the benching, All of a sudden, he's, how could we eat, not bench Hashem, But he goes around murdering people, but yet he wants to do, he wants to bench. But my understanding is that the murdering of when a king murders, they don't look at it as if they murdered people with cold blood. They sort of feel eligible to murder. And
I think, excuse me, I think that Shaul HaMelech did the same thing. He killed the Yod Anim, and then he goes looking for one.
He killed the Kayanim in Noif.
No. Before the war, he's going and looking for Yod Anim or a woman to tell him.
Oh, Yidoni. Yidoni.
Yeah.
So
he killed them all, and then he's looking for one.
So what does that mean?
It's the same like him looking for somebody to do the blessing. He killed them all, and then he's looking for one.
He's a hypocrite. Right. He's saying it's like there's some type of a hypocrisy over here.
He doesn't like them. He doesn't like them for the people to use it, but he wants to use one.
Right. Well, let's see. Mordechai is our historian over here. Tell us, Mordechai, what does this remind you of?
Yeah, it reminds me of Yanai was a Hashmonaim king, but if you contrast him with Agrippus, who was also a Hashmonaim king, at least Agrippus was humble and acknowledged that there was some problem with his pedigree, whereas most of the other Hashmonaim kings didn't.
Interesting, right? There's a whole story about Agrippus, and they said, Achinu ato, you are our brother. The rabbis calmed him down. Right. Okay, good connection there. Yeah, yes, Ezra.
I think in both cases, he might have thought them to be Moed b'malchut, and that's the reason why he did.
Right.
We may not agree to the way he thought, but that's what he did. So he may have looked at what he's doing now completely separate from what he did before, because he felt he was justified in killing the Rabbanim because they were a threat to his kingdom. But here he still feels that he has to do this mitzvah of Birkat HaMazon, but he has to try and figure out how to do it because he doesn't have somebody there to help him do that. I'm not saying that I justify anything that he did. All I'm saying is I'm trying to explain what maybe his what
was going on in his mind. Yeah. Of course, we're not going to explain Yanai. I mean, he's a murderer, according to all opinions. There's no question. And he murdered people just because one of them, insulted him or questioned him. He goes around killing everyone, And the idea, and also we know he was a tzedukah. He didn't believe in Torah Shebaal Peh. He was also a tzedukah, and which means he only followed Torah Shebachsav and so on. Very sad story how the Chashmonaim, all the people who helped us and win the war, the great scholars and holy people who risked their lives to help us win the war against the Greeks, and we got back to Beis Hamikdash. It became such an embarrassing family. Like the family ended up, totally being destroyed and killing each other, and who knows what happened afterwards. And according to the Ramban, the reason why they were destroyed is because they were supposed to give back the kingship to the tribe of Judah, and they didn't. They kept it. They were Levites. They were Kohanes. Excuse me. They were from the tribe of Kohanes are from the tribe of Levi, and they were warriors. They won the war against the Greeks, but now the thing is they should have given the kingship back to Judah, and they didn't. So according to the Ramban, the punishment was that they ended up all the great things they did, and of course, we still celebrate Hanukkah, but it ended up in a downfall because they transgressed the mitzvah in the Torah, Lo Yosur Shevet MiYehuda. The ruler should not ever end from Judah, and they transgressed that, and therefore that's the way the Ramban explains. Very famous Ramban that explains it that way. Okay, so I think so. And Robert, you wanted to say something?
Yeah,
Yes.
I guess, part of what I'm struggling with is that here is somebody, as other times in ancient history, let's call it, that innocent rabbis are killed, but yet the perpetrator is allowed to then continue to identify and celebrate Jewish ritual. I know that, Spinoza was a heretic to the rabbis and he was excommunicated. That was in a more modern time. But, we're a forgiving, people. We have all these leniencies. But when there's capital punishment that's done, killing people by the mere fact that we're rabbis and not necessarily that we know against him, I'm trying to justify all of these kinds of, phenomenon within Judaism.
So I will tell you, there's a big difference. There was almost zero rabbis left to even think of excommunicating. He wiped them all out. And the only ones that were left, we know of two. Yeshua ben Prachya, who ran away and escaped, and his relative, the relative of Yanai, was Shimon ben Shetach, who was hidden by Yanai's wife or daughter-in-law.
Right. He was a relative of hers, as you explained.
Right. So that was the only two. So there's no way of excommunicating him. In other words, they didn't even have a bezdin. They had nothing. They couldn't do anything. If they tried to get to, if there was a bezdin, he would have killed. He would have murdered them. He had his people checking around. Any rabbis, anyone with the black hat. It's over. They were roaming the streets with anyone with black hats. Okay. Yes, Ezra.
I think that even if they did manage, based on what you just said, that, he may have killed indiscriminately. It didn't matter whether or not he was excommunicated, because he would have gone after all the people who listened to the rabbis who did excommunicate. So, what would have been the purpose?
Right. Probably also correct. In other words, he was the king. He had everything, he was basically true. Thank you, Ezra, for bringing that up, because that is probably correct. Yes, Ben.
I want to add that the Levites were great fighters in other cases too. Like in Chet HaEgel, the Levites are the ones that fought the ones that sinned and killed them.
Right. Correct.
Yeah.
That's right.
Say again?
The Levium were the ones who joined Moshe and helped them kill out anyone from the Chet HaEgel. Esechav Layadav, as one of Lahikir, Esechav Layadav, Ishtamram, Esechav Rescha Yinsayru, right? It says in the verses in the Zayis HaBracha.
I think in Hebron,
right. The verse in the Zayis HaBracha, Haimer Lava Volima Larisiv, Esechav Lahikir, Espan of Layadav, Kishamram, Esechav Rescha Yinsayru. These are all about how the Levites went against all normal, natural love and consideration, and they did whatever Hashem wanted, and they helped Moshe get rid of the worshippers of the golden calf. So correct, is good point. It's not the first time.
Wasn't Levi also involved in Hebron when they killed the ones that wanted
Dina.
to marry their sister?
Dina.
Levi was one of the two brothers that killed out Hebron.
Shechem,
I'm sorry. Right. Hamor or whatever.
Shimon and Levi.
Right.
That's right. Another story of Levi taking over the war, being fighting. A warrior. Right. Yeah, the fighting. Interesting. Very interesting. Right. And the idea is that they are people of Mesiras Nefesh. They're willing to risk their life for what's right. So that's true. And here you have the Kayanim continuing in that the Chashmonaim, which is very sad that it ended up that way. That they Well, you know what you really see is when you get too much power, you're too successful, you need to have extra element of humility, because this is what you see. They did such a great thing. They risked their lives. We won the Beis Hamikdash back. I mean, this is like the joy of joys. Hanukkah is considered one of the greatest holidays, and the light of Hanukkah is powerful. It's tremendous, and
the greatest.
just think about it. How many holidays do we have that are 8 days long?
Rabbi Smith. Rabbi Smith.
Yeah, Felice. Well, this is a men's shear.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You can have your husband ask the
I just wanted to
question.
say that Dina,
You can have your husband ask the question.
Simon and Levi were.
So the story is that it is interesting that the Levium were that's very interesting, Ben, that the Levium were considered
they are the Torah teachers
warriors,
and the fighters.
but at the same time, and as I emphasize, that it's all about having that power in being able to be humble at the same time. It boils down, you have to have extra humility at a time. And that's why it says, in fact, the king, we learned together that a king has to bow during Shemona Esrei. Why does the king bow the whole Shemona Esrei? Because he needs that extra humility. Because he has so much power, it could negatively affect him and go to his brain, go to his head, and he has to have extra humility, and that's really a very important point. And so anyway, our Gemara mentioned that Yanai wanted to do the benching. He didn't. So the surprising thing is, so he's so frum, he can't bend. Now he must be, I don't know how old he is here, but I mean, come on, he was brought up, he knows how important it is to bench. Why all of a sudden he doesn't know the benching? Like, he didn't learn it. I mean, the benching is not like this huge, it's not like a huge, complicated thing to learn. Most people know it by heart. I mean, what was going on here that he didn't know how to bench? So we explained yesterday that maybe one of the explanations is that he wanted to get the blessing of the guest blessing, and that you need to have a guest for. So anyway, he had Shimon ben Shetach come, and his wife made sure that he's not going to murder Shimon ben Shetach if she brings him out of his hiding place, and he promises that he's not going to hurt him. And so sure enough, Shimon ben Shetach comes, he sits there, and Shimon ben Shetach obviously was not happy with Yanai. Yanai is a murderer, and Shimon ben Shetach has, he's trying to keep Torah and encourage Torah in the whole community, and yet he has Yanai, who's this Tzeduki, who's against the Torah, and at the same time, he's king. So Shimon ben Shetach is stuck with so obviously he doesn't want to show him much respect. At the same time, he doesn't want to get murdered. And so Yanai says, "Oh, look at how much I'm honoring you." And Shimon ben Shetach answers him back and says, "The Torah is honoring you." And he's doing that because he's sort of making he's making some type of a protest against this evil and wicked guy, Yanai. He should, shouldn't think of himself as, that he's giving him honor. Anyway, he gave him this a cup to say the grace after meal, and Yanai said, "What am I going to do? I can't say the grace after meal on without eating anything." So he drank that cup. In this way, he was able to. They were able to. They gave him another cup, and he was able to do the grace after meal, which really shows us something that we learned earlier on, that as long as, even if they finished eating, and this attests to that same idea earlier, that even if a group finished eating, if they theoretically could eat more, they can join another person in the benching. The other person came after the meal was over, right? And yet he's joining them he's going to be able to join them for the benching. Now, the surprising thing here is that he does the grace after meal for them, and he exempts them in the grace after meal. But how is he saying grace after meal after drinking? He didn't have bread. So that's one of the issues here. And the Gemara says that he held this way, that it's allowed, but he's an individual view, and we don't hold that way. He says, Lagarmehu David, what he did, that he included them in his benching, he followed his view, but we know Reb Chia bar Abba says name Reb Yochanan, you can't be mitzi others unless you eat bread with them, and only then could you actually say the bracha of Berachas Hamazon. You eat a kazayas. Now on a kazayas is where we had a whole issue that eating a kazayas should not allow you to bench for other people. You really should eat kedei svia, the amount of satisfaction. And that was another issue that we were dealing with. And Rashi has his shot, and we mentioned that there are other explanations. Yes, Ezra.
We're basically giving I will use the term excuse in quotations, that this is the way that he held. Maybe he didn't hold that way. Maybe the fact of the matter is that he was worried about his life. And so therefore he did what he did, from a standpoint of if he didn't do it, the king would have killed him, irrespective of whether or not the king gave his word to his wife, because the king was the way he was. And maybe we shouldn't go by it, because this is a situation, Rishata Tahak situation.
Right. So the question is did he really hold? Now, I must say, if you want to learn it that way, Rashi says, Rashi learns that the others don't agree with him. But theoretically, if you really wanted to learn it that way, Garmei hu David, you could say, is to save his bones. Garmei could mean bones. To save his life, he did it that way. So you could learn it your way. I just don't know that anyone does. I'm just telling you that they actually could fit the wording. Now Rashi doesn't say it that way. Rashi says but anyway, it is an interesting point that you're making, because it was really like the question is, he seems to wanna follow the halacha, and that's why he drank. According to you, it could be the reason why they don't want to learn that way. Maybe because he was so careful that he drank the cup of wine instead of benching on it, which is what they wanted him to do. And so it seems like he wasn't breaking any laws when he was doing this, and he wanted to follow this. But let me just take a look in the back. Yeah, I don't see them discussing that. They have a whole other interesting thing over here that one of the explanations here is Yanai was a parush. He followed Torah, then he became a tzeduki, and then he came back to Judaism. And because he came back to Judaism, he didn't want to join. He didn't want anyone else. He didn't want the other people in his household to join for the Zimun, because they were tzedukim. They hadn't returned to real, authentic Judaism. And because you're not supposed to be mazamin with a kuti, and they were considered like kutim or tzedukim. So, therefore, if you can't join a kuti, you for sure can't join a tzeduki. The wife of Yanai brought Shimon ben Shetach. He didn't want to eat and drink with them because Shimon ben Shetach didn't believe them. But Yanai thought that just like the wife, anyway, very interesting that his wife, Yanai thought that since his wife is allowed to eat with him, he should also be allowed. And anyway, so it's it's a complicated story how they explain it, but they wanted to understand why he didn't give him bread, and somehow this is going to explain. I'm not going to go into it. It's already 11:06, but maybe I'll go through it after. But that's an interesting thing that I see they bring up over here. Anyway, the bottom line is that that Yanai that he did this grace that he benched for Yanai, and the Gemara concludes that you need to have a kazayas dagon, and we mentioned that Rashi holds that why is a kazayas good enough? And Rashi says that as long as you eat a kazayas and you're obligated rabbinically, you could exempt others that are obligated biblically. And we explained yesterday that someone who eats only an olive size, normally only obligated to bench to say the grace after meal on a rabbinic level. And if you do that, how could you exempt someone who's obligated on a biblical level? So Rashi brings a bahag that says you can only exempt someone else who also ate on a rabbinic level. For example, if the other person only ate an olive size and you only ate an olive size, then you could exempt him. But Rashi doesn't like that because it doesn't fit the story over here. With Yanai, Yanai obviously ate a nice meal. He's a king. And therefore, it seems like all you need is to have a kazayas. You could exempt someone who ate a full meal. And all you ate is an olive size. So Rashi says, you know why? Because once you're obligated rabbinically, you can then exempt someone even if he's biblical. And Rashi has a problem that he has to answer. If according to that view, there's a problem because there's a law that a child can't exempt an adult. Why not? A child is also obligated on a rabbinic level. Let him exempt an adult for benching. And Rashi comes up with this major innovation that a child's obligation of benching is not his. It's his father's obligation of benching. The father has an obligation to teach the child to bench. So when the child does the mitzvah, it's not really the child's mitzvah, it's really the father's mitzvah of chinuch. Now, obviously, other opinions argue on this, and they say it's the child's mitzvah of chinuch, and it's a big discussion in the commentaries about dealing with what is the mitzvah of chinuch. There's numerous ways of discussing, numerous areas of discussion about the obligation of a child. Again, we can't get into it now, but maybe on Sunday. But Sunday's Yom Tov. Maybe we'll get into it on Tuesday, but the only other thing that I want to mention is that Tosfos holds that the fact that you are someone who is within the category of being obligated in benching, that's enough to be able to exempt someone else. So again, you are obligated only on a rabbinic level, but you can exempt someone on a biblical level because you are someone who has such a biblical obligation had you eaten a full meal that to satisfaction. However, a child that is, even if he eats to satisfaction, he's only going to be obligated on a rabbinic level. So Tosfos is arguing on Rashi and saying the mitzvah of chinuch is on the child. He is obligated to bench. The child is obligated, but he can't exempt an adult because he never has that biblical obligation of benching. A child is always only obligated on a rabbinic level because in Torah doesn't obligate a child to bench because a child is not a person who's mature enough to be obligated on a mitzvah. But on a rabbinic level, they did obligate a child to bench, but it's only rabbinic even if the child eats a full meal. So according to Tosfos, the idea is that the child has a mitzvah to bench, but he can't exempt an adult because he never falls in the category of a biblical obligation of benching until he becomes an adult. And however, a regular adult, a regular Jew, is sometimes obligated on a biblical level, and therefore he's within the category of being obligated on a biblical level. If he is obligated to bench, even on a rabbinic level, he can exempt someone from his biblical obligation. So he basically falls into that category and he can do it. So that's based on this Gemara. One word of our Gemara, which creates this whole issue, is the fact that it says kazayas. Ad sheyoichal imah kazayas dagon, instead of saying sheyoichal dagon svias kadei svia, it says kazayas. Should have said the amount of satisfaction. He eats a satisfying amount. Then he could exempt, and instead it says a kazayas, an olive size, and that creates this whole issue. And you have Rashi, the Bahag, and Tosfos that we just explained. I want to wish all of you a very happy Shavuos, a good Shabbos, a happy Shavuos, and a Kabbalah Satir of Pnimius.
Rabbi.
We should
Bye-bye.
become
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.
Have a good
Shabbat
Shabbos.
Shabbat
Sameach.
shalom. Good Shabbos,
We'll see
everyone.
you all.
Bye-bye.
Chag Sameach, Chag Sameach. We'll see you all in Mr. Hashem on Tuesday. That's
Yes,
Bye-bye.
Hashem. Good
Sei
Shabbos,
gesund.
Big Yontif.
Shabbos Geyontif. Moshe, did you want to ask something?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I wanted to say if the son eats more than a kazayit and he's still not on a biblical level, but he's on a rabbinical level, but the father cannot do is not able to carry out that function. Can the son carry it out for the father?
No, the son can't bench for the father.
He can't, even if the father can't.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't, right. No, the father can't, he's exempt, whatever he can, there are other ways of, number one is maybe he shouldn't have bread or should have it in less than a certain amount of time, or if he could do maybe a shorter version. There's a Brich Rachmana version that we mentioned. But whatever, there is, the fact that the child can't exempt the father. He could say word for word with the father and help the father out, but he can't actually exempt the father.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Yeah. Chag Sameach. Okay. Mordechai.
Yes, the thing with where he had in the Gemara where he drank the 2 cups of wine, it reminded me that there's a halacha that say like if somebody's at a kiddush and mazonos isn't available, for example, like during Pesach when we don't eat gebrox, that one can have 2 cups of wine instead of wine and mazonos. Right.
So wine could be considered a meal,
Right.
at least in that sense. It's called the suuda, kazayas of a revius of wine. So that is considered. So you're saying that's similar to this Gemara here, where he drank this cup. In other words, but it seems like maybe it doesn't fall into the same rules, because here you don't even need to have wine. Here, anything but water works. But for a kiddush b'makom suda, you do need to have wine. You can't drink apple juice.
Right, 2 cups of wine.
Right, you need 2 cups of wine,
Right.
one for the kiddush and one for the meal. But
Right.
you can't have that meal cup. Can't be apple juice. Here, even apple juice would work. So basically, it comes out that it's a different rule here than the rule over there. Than the rule by kiddush. But yeah, it's a good comparison. Okay, have a wonderful Shavuos. Sei gesund.
Okay, you too. Bye.
Kabbalah Satira b'simcha b'pnimius.